Today on Between the Lines, discover the essential skills to building successful relationships with my guest, James Tamm. I'm Barry Kibrick. James Tamm is a former judge and an expert on dispute resolutions. Along with his co-author, Ronald Lewitt, their book, Radical Collaboration, is a how-to manual for anyone seeking constructive ways of overcoming defensiveness and getting the results they want.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the purpose for me.
Jim, welcome to the show. It's been already a pleasure having you here.
Thank
We've
you,
just
Barry.
been fun talking as it is. I'm going to begin no better place than the way you started with this definition of what is radical collaboration. As you say here, it teaches practical methods to significantly improve your skills for building collaborative relationships.
Right.
I'm going to just say elaborate on the collaborate.
Well, in today's environment, both work and interpersonally, our lives are so complex and interrelated that it's hard to thrive and sometimes not even survive if you don't have good relationship building skills. And so what we found are there are certain skills that make people much more creative and much more skillful at building those relationships. It takes both a mindset and a skill set. And if you can get those down, you can make radical differences in your life.
Well, you say in the book that and right off the bat, you're keying on this, that the two key ingredients, and the most important one, is that of yourself, of making that internal change, even more than the external change by the organization. If you can make that internal change, and that's what this book is about, that's the key for it all to start to flow.
A lot of organizations want to be more collaborative because it's so important, and they think they can just jump in and say, to a group of people, all right, now you're going to be collaborative, now you're going to be a team or whatever, and they don't realize that collaboration starts inside the individual. So you have to give the individual both that mindset and skill set to be more effective when they're doing that.
Now let's start elaborating on what we're trying to gain with this collaboration, and there's a word you use, collaborative capital, and the word itself caught my eye, but the definition was even more powerful, and it is this discretionary capital that you get by empowering, in my opinion, the people that you're working around so that they begin to literally offer of themselves way more than would be ever expected because they have the passion now to give of themselves.
Yeah, just if anybody has a strong interest in their job or their career, and most of us do, we find it goes in two different directions. One is you're thinking all the time about how to make it better, how to improve the bottom line, how to have better relationships, how to improve the product, or what can I do to, pull the rug out from underneath somebody else? Who's screwing me? What can I do to bug them? That kind of stuff. So it can be either positive or negative, and what we're trying to do is get people to see the impact of both of those.
Well, you did some great examples here where it's not done, and you can see, I think there was a term, playing it by the rules, or somebody where the guy would say,
work the rule.
Work the rule, right? So, it's basically, it's not my job. So they look at that work the rule and see if it's, hey, I'm supposed to take a break over here, and I'm supposed to do this over here, but this collaborative capital, when you gain it, you find that those things no longer pay attention because your people, I know a great example is even my own show, where we do other productions sometimes, and the crew here, I find, go out of their way to make that product. They take personal pride in that product, and it makes the whole space so much more enjoyable when that takes place.
That's the collaborative capital that we're talking about, and it's just as important as the financial capital or the intellectual capital that a company might have. If they have employees that are willing to do that, it makes a huge difference to the bottom line.
Now, this is a workbook as well as a philosophy book, because it's basically two things. You talk about the philosophical underpinnings in order to achieve this radical collaboration as well as the working. We're never going to be able to cover everything, but I want to tell everybody, as the cover of the book says, there's 5 essential skills. the collaborative intention. We'll know what, we can go into some of these. The truthfulness, obviously, truth needs no excuse, as they say, or any defense. Self-accountability, self-awareness and awareness of others, problem solving and negotiating. But I couldn't help but get literally stuck on favorably self-awareness and awareness of others. It seems to be the key element, even once you achieve the collaborative, the radical collaboration, that you must continuously develop that self-awareness and the empathy or awareness that your, whoever it is, whether it's your business, your organization, your family members, have.
It's the linchpin to relationships, and especially having awareness about your own defensiveness, because defensiveness is the key to building those relationships. If you get defensive when you're in a relationship, or when you're under stress in a relationship, or trying to solve conflict in a relationship, it's like a poison pill to that relationship. So when we've gone in and worked with organizations, what we've tried to do is get people to better understand what defensiveness is about, how they can see, or at an earlier stage when they're starting to get defensive, and then what they can do about it. And that has a huge payoff.
And by the way, you're very clear to say that defensiveness is not defending yourself. We all have to defend ourselves at certain times. Defensiveness, according to you, is not about protecting ourselves, though, from others. You say we get defensive because they don't want to experience the uncomfortable feelings within themselves. Back to that self-awareness.
Most people think that we're defending ourselves from other people, but usually what happens is other people are triggering fears inside of us that usually have to do with fears about our significance or our competence or our likability or helplessness. And so if somebody is around other people and say they feel insignificant or incompetent, oftentimes that causes them discomfort and they don't want to feel that way. So they might behave in ways that let them be unaware of that. Maybe they get very critical of other people. Or maybe they withdraw from relationships so they don't have to feel that. Or they start flooding people with information, you know, in order to prove a point or be right. Or maybe they just go eat too much, or whatever it might be, you know, go into denial. There's a list of about 50 different signs of defensiveness that we have. But what they're doing is they're behaving in a way that lets them not feel what's really going on inside of them. So they're defending themselves from themselves.
I even know when I slip into it accidentally, and then I pull back from it, I realize what I'm angry at is the flaw I found in myself. And I catch it, thank God, after 500 books of reading about it. But I do know it's very difficult. It's very hard for people to, and you know, you give a prescription. May I read it?
Sure.
The prescription for dealing with your own defensiveness, and this is, I think, so key, is to let yourself experience those feelings and not to avoid them. I think so many people don't want to feel defensive. You're saying, wait a minute, and I think I gave you that example, is feel it, then just work through it and don't remain in that space.
Yeah, we're saying, you know, move towards the fear, let yourself experience. Now that's very counterintuitive, because what we're finding with the defense system is to help us not feel that. And what we're suggesting is, no, let yourself feel it.
Well, you even give us, let's go over, this is something I definitely want to go over, because as I said, I know truthfulness and things like that when it comes to it, but I think the creative way of what you call the defensive action plan, I think, is going to be important to people. And again, a few things I think obvious, I want to concentrate on those a little less obvious. I'll list them though. Take responsibility for yourself, slow down, always important in awareness, and deep breathing is always important in awareness, and you have them both in here. But three things I want to key on. Confront negative self-talk. I swear I spent a lifetime dealing with that one. And then I love your definition of CYA, which we think normally means cover your behind. You say it's check your assumptions.
In just about every employment dispute that I've mediated, and I've mediated a lot of them, somebody, oftentimes everybody, is making incorrect assumptions. A very common one is that because we're in a dispute, you must not like me, or you're out to get me, or you're trying to crush me, or whatever. And so we're suggesting one of the important things to do is focus in, try to become more aware of what assumptions you're making, and then take every opportunity to check those assumptions out.
You then say, though, to do two things, and I think, again, needs a little explanation, because by themselves, these words may not mean the right thing, and that is to detach and then start over.
By detach, I mean a couple things. One is detach from the desire to act out in an inappropriate way. So if I know that one of the signs of my defensiveness is, say, flooding you with information to try and prove you wrong and me right, if I notice that I'm just going on and on and on and on trying to bury you with information, I can pay attention to that behavior, and I can just say to myself, okay, here I'm doing this, so I need to let go of that because that's not an effective behavior for me. So part of it is detaching from that. The second part is detaching from over-identification with the outcomes, with the results. So an example of that would be, say this is a proposal that I'm turning into my boss or a client, or a customer, whatever. And unbeknownst to my boss, my self-esteem is wrapped up in this. And when
and of course it has to be, you wrote it, am I right? You can see how that happens.
Yeah. So when the boss rejects it, he's not just rejecting this, he's rejecting me. That's what it feels like. So it's helpful in reducing your defensiveness to know the difference between this and me. That this is the report, this is the proposal, and this is me. And it's not the same thing. So it can be a healthy separation there.
And then where does the start over come in then? So then once you make that realization, you now begin the collaborative effort again?
Yeah, well, it never is in our best interest to be beating ourselves up. And a very common...
Darn, I'm a prize fighter. But you're so right. When you can learn that, I want to emphasize that again, because I find that when you learn that one thing, and not only learn it, but take that to heart, gosh, I just want every viewer out there to do that. It's so important.
Well, remember what we're talking about here are unconscious behaviors and unconscious fears that we're usually not aware of. So when we become aware of them, a very common reaction is to, you beat yourself up. And in order to deal with those fears, what you need is a sense of safety. And so it's important to cut yourself a little slack, give yourself a little compassion when you start getting defensive. And, if you don't, it's like trying to get a turtle to stick its neck out by beating on the shell. It's not going to work. You have to create that sense of safety. So if you can let go of that and say, all right, I got defensive, now I'm going to acknowledge it to myself, I'm going to take some actions, and I'm going to move on and not hold a grudge against myself.
I usually end it that way, against the self, but you also in here talk about creating this safe environment for the relationship partner as well. It's important for them not to be in a state of having to be defensive. Their environment needs to be safe so that all of the ideas leading to the better good of the whole can be brought out.
Yeah. Over the years when I first started talking about defensiveness, everybody wanted to know, how do I make the other person non-defensive? And generally, the best way to start is for you to stay non-defensive. So the best thing that you can do to help other people feel safe is for you not to get your buttons pushed, for you to stay non-defensive.
So once again, you're not trying to change the world so that the world doesn't push your buttons. You're trying to get a better understanding of yourself so your buttons don't feel pushed when they're being pressed hard.
Yeah, because there's really a couple different ways that you can try to deal with your buttons. One is to get greater self-awareness about it, so it's not as tender within you, or get the whole rest of the world to change. And I don't know about you, but I've been remarkably unsuccessful at getting the rest of the world to change in order to make my life better. So it seems to be much more effective if you can get increase that awareness about what your buttons are.
Now, I said before truthfulness when we were talking about the essential skills, and I didn't really want to slide it under the rug, as I said, because it seems obvious, but truth, and you're very clear here, truthfulness is not just giving somebody's opinion that they don't look good in that dress or something. As you say, that gives a bad name to truthfulness. Yeah. But true truth, when you're dealing with it, it's so much easier because A, you don't have to think of all the lies you've been telling. I mean, right off the bat, truthfulness works just in that regard. But there's a whole level. One of the fellows, Will Schutz, is that his name?
Will Schutz.
Truth is the grand simplifier.
Yeah.
We can't go wrong with it.
Yeah. And what we're talking about with truth is being more accurate in relating what's going on inside of us. So I would be trying to tell you what's happening with me, what my truth is, rather than tell you what's going on inside of you, because that rarely is impressive to the other person.
Well, then that truth, though, in fact, this is kind of funny. You're a judge, former judge. And the truth, as you know, especially in a courtroom, again, we swear on the Bible to tell it, and yet it's probably where it's fudged oftentimes the most. What is it that makes us constantly think sometimes, and I say constantly think sometimes, it's very funny because it's always entering the mind a little bit, and hopefully if you're an honest person it never comes out. Why do we think it's almost easier to quickly not tell the truth? It seems almost that the first person's reaction is always somehow to skirt the issue, to move out of the truth, when it's really the safest place to be.
Well, it's probably it may be the safest. It can also be the scariest. Sometimes you feel vulnerable telling the truth. So there's probably a natural reaction to try to protect yourself, and one way to protect yourself is to hide.
Hide, like that turtle, and wait till you get banged on the shell.
Yeah.
Listening. When we think of any kind of proactive awareness or proactive destination we're going for, we think of it as something we're either self-talking, talking to, I'm telling you something. Listening is an item in here that you highlight to the point where it's easily as important as anything you're going to say.
Yeah, it's one of the absolute key skills to have. And we include it in the truthfulness section because in order to be truthful, as the skill that we're talking about for truthfulness is being able to create an environment where people will tell you the truth, where they feel safe enough to tell you the truth. And in order to get other people to tell you that truth, you need to make it safe for them, so you have to be a good listener. You have to create safety, and you have to show them that you understand what you're hearing from them. So it is a gradual process.
Now, something that you say don't be too gradual about, and again, you say it to the relationship, the person you're having the relationship, or the organization, and you hinted at this before, you say it to yourself, and that is forgive quickly.
Yeah, it is not in your interest to hold a grudge. Now, that doesn't mean forget about what happened in the past. You know, if you're Charlie Brown and Lucy is saying, come kick the football, and you know that the last 50 times that you've gone to kick the football, she's pulled out the football and you ended up on your butt, you might want to tell her, all right, I'm willing to try it one more time, but I want you to put up a $5,000 bond in case you move the football.
Oh, that's the judge in you, right?
The negotiator, yeah. So, we're not saying by forgive quickly, we're not saying forget the past, but we're saying don't hold a grudge if someone is open to collaborating with you. Now, you may have to come up with ways of dealing with those past issues or the past fears that come up.
Now, this is a whole episode on collaboration, but obviously collaboration is the yin or the yang, depending on how you look at it, of conflict. And conflict is something that you really don't want us to fear, and in a sense, in some of the passages I've read, you want us to embrace, actually. And you have this view that out from this conflict, some of the great collaboration and some of the great results really do sort of stream forth from it.
Yeah, you look at all of the major gains that people have made in the world peace, for example. Now, they haven't always stuck, but it's because people like Mandela and de Klerk have been willing to take on important conflicts, or Arafat and Rabin, and people like that. They've been willing to take great risks and go into that conflict, but most of us are very conflict avoidant. And the problem with that is that no matter how much you want to avoid it, there's going to be some conflict in a relationship if you have any aliveness to it. If you're in a relationship that doesn't have any conflict in it, you're either overly medicated, or you're in denial, or it's a very boring relationship. And so you better deal with it. The key, though, is to deal with it in a way that's going to support the relationship rather than undermine the relationship.
And the key, according to you, and this, I don't know how else to say it better than the way you said it, is focus not on your interests only, but really focus on the interests of the person or party that you're in conflict with. That is a very empowering thing, to get rid of your own interests, to stop what you're thinking is the right thing, and really start to focus on what would be of interest to that person?
Yeah, well, it really takes understanding the interest of both parties, but typically the way most of us have learned to deal with conflict is we try to figure out what the problem is, we figure out what our favorite solution is, and then we go to the other side and we try to convince them that we're right and they're wrong. And oftentimes through either compromises or trade-offs or the superior strength of one side or the other, they reach some kind of common ground. And we see it all the time. We see it internationally, we see it in corporations, we see it in families between spouses and parents and kids. So it works for the most part, but it doesn't necessarily give you the best results. So what we're suggesting is don't start thinking about solutions until you have a better understanding of what all of the interests are that are involved, both yours and the other person's. So when I would be mediating a labor dispute, oftentimes I would get the union and management together, and I would say, I want to learn all about the union's position here. I want to understand what their interests are, but I want to learn it from management. So I would have management tell me that. And of course they'd try and they'd get it a little bit wrong, and so I'd have the union explain it to them and they'd have them ask again, you know. And finally, after we'd do that, they could eventually articulate the union's interest to the satisfaction of the union. Then I'd do another role reversal with the union and say, now I want to learn management's point of view, but I want to learn it from the union. And we do the same thing. And I wouldn't let them move on to the stage where they're trying to find solutions until they could both articulate the interest of the other side to the other side's satisfaction. So until you do that, then you're wasting your time trying to find solutions. So it's basically slowing them down, focusing their energy on the underlying interest rather than solutions too early in the process.
And then you even added another layer. You said don't assume that the solution is just this fixed pie that needs to be divided up. Because again, that's what everybody, usually in a heated conflict, or it doesn't have to be heated, doesn't have to be a conflict, but there's a give and take. You're assuming that there's only this fixed pie that can be divided. You say get rid of that assumption.
Well, most people, when they get into conflict, they start getting a little defensive, they start getting rigid in their thinking, their IQ drops about 20 points, and they're not nearly as creative because they're afraid of taking risks. And so when you're in that situation, one of the things that's going to be most important to do is try to come up with a lot of very creative solutions at that point. And you know, this is when you're thinking outside the box or expanding the size of the pie or whatever metaphor you want to use. But this is when the creativity is so important, and having the parties work together to try to come up with solutions that meet the interest of both parties, not just their own.
By the way, you also say that the best result is when they're doing this not in a sort of grudgingly manner, but they're doing this because they really did get this end result of feeling that it's fair. It's just, you said the term compliance is sort of a byproduct of this because they're really enjoying now what the result was when they collaborated like this.
Yeah, if they really have the collaborative relationship, they're going to do everything in their power, not only to meet their own interests, but also protect the interests of the other side. So they really are working together that way. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about a radical collaboration, when you're really working hard to meet the other side's interests as much as they are their own interests.
Jim, we're just about out of time, but you promised me earlier before the show started, and I do make my judges as well swear to oath on this, that you will respond to those that write you, because on the website that you have here, there's a lot of these exercises as well. There's information. It's not a substitute for the book, but it's always something interesting for them to look at. I'm going to give it out. It's www. And it's very easy. It's the title of the book, radicalcollaboration.com, RADICAL, collaboration, COLLABORATION.com. Jim, you say these words, a sense of influence over our own lives makes undesirable events less demoralizing. Now we go back to the very beginning where we talked about that self-awareness. I've just experienced this with a close relationship of mine. Came home yesterday to our house and was just frustrated out of her mind because of this effort that was going on at her job. And then when I read these lines just now, I said, oh, I wish I had my notes with me then, because that's it right there. No matter what is going on, that sense of the influence that you have, I think she could have avoided a lot of that pain she felt.
Yeah, a lot. If people have a better sense of the actions that are available to them, if they have a belief system that they have a lot of choice in their life, it does make it less destructive, less frustrating when they're faced with those situations that they may not be able to change.
Jim, our time is up, but I do want to thank you for sharing so much of those choices with us today.
Thank you, Barry. It's been a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for joining us. Now, before James leaves, I'd like to leave you with these words from Radical Collaboration. The ability to make effective choices and live an authentic life depends to a great extent on a capacity to be self-reflective. I'm Barry Kibrick. One of the best ways to become self-reflective is to look between the lines. Do so, and you will enjoy an authentic life. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
If you'd like a tape of our show or would like to become a member of our book club and receive our weekly email show updates, just write us at barrykibrick@aol.com.